everybody, it's Michael
and Carter,
and this is another episode of Hammercircuit. Today we're going to be talking about STEM and the fall of it in America.
Yes,
and
the death of STEM.
The death of STEM and how it relates to other countries and what we can kind of maybe expect in the next 5 years on the current path we're going.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we should do is we're going to look at some stats. So we're going to look at some common engineering majors, and we're going to just see how they're...
And just a little background information. So everybody always thinks that engineering is just like this thriving industry, and this is what scientists often tell us, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye the Science Guy. They're always telling us that we're going to need engineers in the future, that this is the future, right? But although they're right, the problem is that the stats are slightly shocking to see the growth of these fields. Michael, how about you read off the stats of the different engineers in the STEM field, like how their growth?
Alright, so like one of the best ones right now is biomedical engineers. Their job outlook is going to grow by 23%.
Which is the best in this list.
And it's just the best in this list in 5 years.
As far as engineers go. And just to let you know, these all come from Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Right, so it's a very reputable source. Next one is industrial engineers. They're only going to grow by 1%, which is slower than the average job growth overall. Followed by could you explain what industrial engineers do?
So industrial engineers, in a nutshell, they're primarily focused on improving the efficiency of a machine. So if there's a train, they look at the train, they find a way to make the train faster, safer, better.
Right. So that's industrial engineers, only going to be job growth of 1%.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is chemical engineers. Their job prospect is growth of 2%. Over 5 years, and that's also still below the average, more or less, in average job growth. Chemical engineers, they invent chemical products,
a lot of the times they work for the food industry because they're producing chemicals that go into a food.
Right, and cleaning supplies, that type of stuff.
Yeah, this goes on.
So that's that. Civil engineering, that's 8%. It's more or less the average job growth rate.
Right, so it's not doing terrible, but it's doing overall pretty good. And civil engineering is something that, I'll put it this way, you would expect civil engineering to be a lot higher in demand simply because United States of America has a D+ infrastructure, which is really bad. Our infrastructure is crumbling.
Yeah. There's article at least every single year about some bridge that needs to be repaired or a bridge that broke down because we built these bridges and we haven't maintained them that much, and that's why we have a D+ infrastructure.
Yeah, I remember just a week ago I saw a news report about how a bridge in St. Louis, which is where we live, a bridge in St. Louis is literally crumbling, and it's just a roll of the die to see if it's going to stand, it's chance to see if it's going to stand when every single car passes over. At any moment, it could just collapse. I don't remember the name of the particular bridge, but it was a report I saw on the news. And this is an example. I'm sure that you guys can think of infrastructure around you that's crumbling as well. So with this being a huge issue, you'd think that civil engineers, which are in charge of improving infrastructure and rebuilding it, you think it'd be a bit higher than 8%, wouldn't you, Michael?
Yeah, you would think. It's
only slightly worrying.
Yeah.
I'm only sweating a little bit right now.
The shivers and stuff like that. So followed by that, we got mechanical engineering, which is 5%. Not that bad, but it's still a little bit under the average job growth for the next 5 years. And could you describe what mechanical engineering does?
It's pretty much the most broad form of engineering that you can get a degree in. So it's working on overall motors, pistons, and figure out how engines work, the construction of all of those devices, and list goes on about their job. But they are, in a nutshell, if you need an engineer that just understands all of the basics of engineering, can get something done, those are the people that you talk to. But then if you need somebody that's a bit more specified in the field, that's when you talk to somebody like an aerospace engineer. Speaking of which,
so aerospace engineer, that's kind of actually the worst. They have a negative 2%.
Wait, what was that, Michael?
Negative 2%. So it's basically 2%. It's a 2% decline in jobs over the next 5 years.
Now wait a minute. That doesn't make sense to me, Michael, because don't aerospace engineers involve aircrafts that enter space? It's almost as if we aren't exploring space anymore.
Not only that, it's not just like aircraft that enter space. It's also it's like jets, planes, like any sort of aircraft, and like stuff that has to do with just air. Yeah. So you gotta ask. It's like we got all these planes, and space is really cool. Like, why aren't we investing any time into this?
I saw this. Buzz Aldrin, he had a shirt on that said "Get your ass to Mars," and that cracked me up. I thought that was great, but he has a point. Although it's funny, he has a point in that. Why haven't we exactly gone to Mars yet? Well, it's because NASA's budget is a minuscule.
It is so minuscule, and I don't know if they're gonna ever. They'll probably, hopefully, add more to the budget, but that's barely gonna do anything compared to.
I hope so.
Compared to the other governmental budgets that are just way higher and larger. For example,
the military.
Yeah.
The military budget, we spend over $600 billion on that every single year.
And no country, the closest countries that come close to that is maybe Russia and China, but almost no country comes close to the amount of money we spend on our military budget.
We bumped up our military budget recently by $50 billion under Donald Trump. Just to give you an idea, Russia spends just over $80 billion every single year. That's insane. I'm going to get my calculator out really quick. We have access to the internet.
And it's like...
one sec. If this is rough math, it's not precise, but if we do 50 divided by 80... that's 62%. So our military budget increase is roughly 62% of the Russians' entire military budget. So our increase is...
It's like 50% of the Russia's...
It's like 2/3.
War power.
It's like 2/3 of their entire budget.
Oh my.
Was our increase.
Right. So
I'd rather spend that on aerospace engineering.
I think aerospace engineering is just really cool. Just personal opinion type of thing. Space, private organizations, corporations are actually probably making more progress. One very, very popular example is SpaceX. They're planning, at least from the interviews I've seen with their CEO Elon Musk, they're planning to get some sort of manned mission to Mars within the next 10 years,
which is amazing. Because if it's not NASA going to bring us there because of a lack of government funding, it's going to be something SpaceX.
It's going to be a private corporation like SpaceX.
Yeah, and you see their improvements of the rockets. The rockets that can go vertical and then land and be reusable.
And with those rockets and with those machines, you need to have software. You can't do all these things manually, which leads to the next type of engineering, which is software engineering. Now, some people don't really count it as engineering because you're not, I don't know why, but some people don't.
But it's engineering.
But it's the second one with the highest job growth, close to biomedical engineering. Their job growth over the next 5 years is 17%. Which
thank God there's one that's improving.
It's great. And the reason why is software, it's been a quote that's been used a lot. Software is literally eating the world. Manufacturing, the automotive industry, food, shopping, all Wall Street, all these places, they're being automated and improved, and they all interact with technology and software on a daily basis now. And it's just, the role of software engineering is always in a constant need. But it's hard to say why this isn't the case with all engineering fields.
Right, because we mentioned these problems. You mentioned things before, like with civil engineering. Although it does have a pretty average job rate growth, it's not nearly high enough to keep up with the level at which our infrastructure needs replacement. But then you look at aerospace engineering, which we mentioned before. We need to explore space, like Buzz Aldrin, with his funny joke shirt and we mentioned these fields, and issues that we have. And the problem is that there aren't the engineers there. There aren't the jobs for the engineers there to meet the demand.
And I believe that, America definitely has the capacity to do many great things. America isn't it's not the best, it's not the worst, it's somewhere in the between, but we have a capacity to do a lot of great things. When the American dream, we try to advertise it so much, but does that really happen? It really depends. But in the high school, I think engineering fields are not stressed enough. At least in Missouri, our engineering courses are only taught by one engineering teacher, and the results may vary, honestly.
And and I mentioned this before. I wrote a paper on this on my personal blog. The structure of our education system is completely incoherent for teaching people how to go into the engineering. It does not adequately prepare a student to enter the STEM field or go into a college to learn how to, to specify in something to enter the STEM field. An example of this is they teach, in our school specifically, they teach you physics first semester, freshman year. The problem with that is all of the math that you need to understand to comprehend the physics properly are taught years later after physics.
It's taught like almost 2 years later, and that's if you're 1 year or 2 years ahead of in math. You might be lucky enough to get into pre-calc senior year if you're taking regular math. So, I mean, and that's kind of the thing. It's like some of the education is incoherent, and a phrase that they use a lot is the education's role in America, at least, is to help transform students into well-educated citizens. And me personally, I believe that's kind of short-sighted, because just because you're a well-educated citizen doesn't mean anything. You could be a humanist, a person who studies literature and stuff.
A Renaissance man,
and not to condemn or be against any of those fields, but some of them they don't really pay that nicely, and some of them you're not really going to get into a job actually relating to your field.
Right. Just to go a little bit further into that, if you're into theater arts, which is a form of liberal arts, yes, you can potentially make money off of it, although statistics don't back that up 100% of the time, right?
Right.
However, also consider this. People are eventually going to pass away. And when they pass away, hopefully they leave something positive behind for future generations. Well, if all you've done is contributed plays, movies, or whatever you're doing in the liberal arts, which isn't producing, most of the time it is not producing any actual progress in the STEM field, right?
I mean, basically, it may seem cynical, but there is a very, very, very small percentage of people in the theater arts field that produce work that is remembered across time. Key example of this is Shakespeare. But do we read Shakespeare on a daily basis? Do we read about him in the news on a daily basis?
And do we read about the 100 other people that tried to be Shakespeare but failed?
Right. So, we're not against
right.
it. It's just
but then let's point out something that we do use every day. How about electricity?
How about electricity? How about cars? All these things that they provide convenience and make our lives way easier. And
they improve society as a whole. They push society forward. These society, are the pioneers.
Right. They make society more productive, more efficient. They allow us to have some luxuries. Before the Industrial Revolution, for example, after it, and before the assembly lines where it was like mass manufacturing, or basically before factories were automated, people had to work long hours. Like I don't even remember the numbers, but it was definitely something like 12-hour 12 hours a day or something like that. Even longer.
Yeah, there was child labor because they didn't have the proper tools to clean small areas and to reach the little nooks and crannies of certain machines. So they'd hire children, pay them near to nothing, and have them do all the cleaning and climb into the nooks and crannies or whatever. So
that's our little spiel about like American education and stuff. And that really raises the question about how are other countries doing?
Right, because, we always hear the narrative that America's number one, America's the best. Well, you think that the best country would be embracing the future, and the future lies within the STEM field. But tell me, Michael, which countries are producing the most engineering jobs in the STEM field?
Well, currently the top 10 or top 8 engineering countries currently are Canada, Brazil, Germany, Switzerland, England, India, China, and Japan. Like, these are all countries that, one, they're smaller, two, like,
not all of them are smaller.
Not all of them are smaller.
India and China are pretty large.
But
so
like, these countries have been, like, around for a long time, and they've just come to the realization, well, Canada is a special it's a special case, but all these countries have been around for a while, and they've just come to the realization that engineering is important to keep their society together and just to keep things moving forward. But in America, this is not really always the case. We get hung up on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think the average person understands the importance of science, right? Like, if you ask somebody, is science important? The average person is going to say yes in America. The difference is that we have not created an education system and a proper system to where we can adequately exercise science and improve on the STEM field and opening up new engineering jobs. We have not properly done that. But then other countries like Canada, Brazil, the ones that Michael mentioned, they have opened up those opportunities and have adjusted their education systems to prepare students to become members of the STEM field.
Yeah. And you can see that a good, like, 3 of these countries are, like, European countries. And one of the coolest parts about Europe is that you could take a train, and I think you said previously a little bit back, you could pay like maybe $20 and you could go like to, like, say you're in Greece or something, you could pay like maybe $20 and then go to Italy for the day.
Yeah, I have friends who have been to Europe, and I'm going to be going to Europe next summer. And the friends, so I'll have personal experience with this, but the friends who have told me about Europe, they've said themselves that the train tickets are incredibly cheap and they can take you long distances very quickly.
And what we've been learning, because we've had to do U.S. government, well, we're starting to study it, is that our train network is barely functioning, in the sense that it's functioning off of government subsidies. It's barely profitable, and it's more expensive than the equivalent in Europe. So it's either we're behind on these engineering marvels that we see in other countries, like in Japan with their bullet trains and stuff, or Japan and China, I guess.
Right, and it brings up another idea. It doesn't quite make sense to me how there's people out there who desire a train system like in Europe, like us. But then it doesn't make sense to me. The part that doesn't quite, I don't comprehend, is why haven't we taken industrial engineers who are specified in improving things? Why don't we give them a ton of jobs, open up a ton of jobs for them, improving our trains, and then have them work with civil engineers to create the bullet trains that are in Japan? Why don't we collaborate with other countries to figure out how to build the most efficient bullet trains? I don't understand. These things, they sound simple in practice, but we're not doing them.
I mean, you could use the argument that, not everybody's fit for engineering, and not many people actually like it, and it's not for everybody. It requires a lot of hard work and all this stuff. But, like, that's kind of a result of how culture perceives it, and like if we perceived engineers in a different way, it could definitely affect the amount of people who would go into those careers for sure.
If there were more jobs opened up for the people, because the question is, why would you want to spend a lot of money on a degree to where you don't have a job to exercise the knowledge that you learned earning that degree? That doesn't make sense. Like, you wouldn't do that. So there is no inclination for students to join these fields unless it is biomedical engineering, civil engineering, or software engineering. And those are important, but we also need chemical engineers, industrial engineers, and we also need aerospace engineers. We can't just have 3 types of engineers being successful and only have have students only become 3 different types of engineers.
And obviously this isn't like a black and white issue. There's probably parts of America and parts of other countries where they're doing extremely well or extremely bad. But we're saying that America as a whole, they're falling behind in science and math and just STEM in general compared to other countries.
Right. This is an example. There's something called a Pisa test, and a Pisa test is it's a way of measuring students' scientific and mathematic literacy. And the way that they register out this test to they give out this test to 71 different countries. And these countries included like Germany, Finland, list goes on. We placed 35th in science and 19th in mathematics. That is just breathtakingly shameful for our country. Like, we can't possibly claim to be the best country in the world and score 35th on science in a test among 71 other countries. So it's evident, like, the proof's in the pudding. Of course we're falling behind in STEM.
So it's really how much stuff, how many, like, when does it boil down to just real truth that, hey, we need to make some changes, and we just have to be brutally honest about there has to be a class or a course that helps advocate for these things. And it's because here's the thing: you learn science, you learn math, you learn English, you learn all these things, but you don't combine them. They're always like, in high school, they're always separate. They keep them separate as much as possible, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of cross function, like, hey, I'm using that math from mathematics in my science class, but then you have the complete dysfunction where you're learning physics first, and the math to actually understand the physics later requires that you know calculus, which is taught 2 years later.
So exactly, you've already forgotten half the physics that you were taught before you can learn the math that is required to understand upper level physics.
So, like, why isn't there a class that actually takes the time and says, because there's a common phrase that we hear from a lot of our friends, is just like, when am I going to use this in the real world, right?
Right.
Engineering and building things and solving problems, that's the real world. In the real world, there are problems that need to be solved. If they're not addressed, they can cause a lot of trouble. So, why can't there be a practical class where they give you problems and you propose solutions and you create solutions with the stuff that you actually learned in high school?
It sounds like a genius idea, but it hasn't been implemented.
Some schools may have implemented it because, there's the state government. You have to do what the state government tells you to do. There's the standard education system inside of America. You have everybody preparing for the ACT, SAT. You have these core educational things that are standards. That probably definitely not all of them, but there's a couple high schools that probably do more. There's probably technical high schools that do more than the state government requires them. Parkway, or at least the school that we go to, we're not going to try to bash on our school. Well, they make some attempt. They have what we call experiential learning opportunities. Carter, he's going to be doing this. He's going to be doing precision engineering somewhere.
South Tech.
I'm going to be doing technology solutions in Spark. Both of these have it where we solve real world problems and we actually have to use our skills. The skills that we either will learn over a short period of time or have just picked up along the way. They're not gonna hold our hand per se.
Yeah, they're gonna show us how to solve these problems, or I shouldn't say show us, but they're going to exercise the muscles in our brain to figure out how to solve problems on our own. That's the whole concept behind it. And of course, they teach us about all the bells and whistles of the fields that we're going into. And these are offered as experiences that are not considered, these are not mainstream experiences that every single high schooler can have. How many people do you say are in your class?
I don't even know yet, but it's definitely less than 20.
Less than 20. And how many kids go to our high school? 1,000?
A couple thousand.
At least 1,000.
Right.
So the idea is how, and that brings up another question. How are you supposed to create a program where 1,000 kids can each individually have a specified education or a way for them to where they can become efficient and brilliant members of society that solve these problems? How can that happen when there's 1,000 students? It just simply comes down to the fact when you have just like your typical mainstream education and you have your typical teachers in these classrooms faced with 20 plus kids, it's almost impossible for the kids to feel like they're having a specialized education in this sense, right?
And I mean, a lot of this is like turning into like a lifestyle advice type of thing, but like what you see a lot is that the people, this is like happiness type of thing, but I'll make a little short thing about it. But a lot of people will try to do something that they just like, and that's okay and stuff, but maybe maybe what they like only will work in the short term, and what happens is that they'll look back when they're 70, 80 or whatever, and they'll be like, why did I waste my time? That type of stuff. And the thing is that a really key point of advice that I've been hearing recently is that you need to figure out what you want to do, and you want to figure out how to do it early. What happens a lot in American society, and it might happen in other countries, I'm not sure, is the thing is propagated is that, oh, I'm not sure what I want to do. The confusion type of thing. Carter had this one friend, and we're not going to drop her name really, but she had no idea what she was going to do, and now she's getting a degree that may or may not really help her in the long run.
Yeah, I'm not going to drop names, but this individual is getting a degree in the fine arts. She's getting a degree in literature, writing, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think she's going to learn a lot about writing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, when it comes to producing capital, how are you going to earn enough money to sustain yourself while writing? Because at that rate, you either have to become a teacher, or you have to write a book, or go into journalism.
I mean, obviously there's many paths, and not everybody should take the same path. But it should be realized that the STEM field is an important field, and you can't just always expect that other people are going to do it. If it falls into a thing where, these people are going to do it, that amount of people is going to dwindle in size, because they're going to be, the more we support the fact that we can put things into practical use, like math and science, that are mandatory courses that are taught, the more likely that people are going to actually maybe go into those fields.
Right. And that's the only way that we can advance our society. If the jobs in these fields are met, the jobs are expanded, and society is pushed forward with science.
So that's really what we're seeing, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope it might have shed some light on like the current state of STEM and just STEM in general in the world. If you find anything interesting related to it, or you have any comments, please leave them below. We would really enjoy it if you guys were able to maybe share, subscribe, follow, like, all those fun stuff. I'm Michael.
I'm Carter.
And this was another episode of Hammer Circuit.